Hey everybody, Captain B-Nard here with your BHDL1 Week 5 recap and Week 6 preview. So, again, going to assume everyone watching this video also watched the weekly battle video, and we're going to go ahead and get right to it. So, our opponent this week was Scorpion, a strong competitive battler and fellow PokeTuber as well. I forgot to mention in the game that coming into this week we were sitting at a 3-1 record, whereas my opponent was sitting at a 2-2 record. And so we did end up getting the win this week, 3-0, but it was a great match, very close, very competitive game as well. Um, so yeah, having said that, we're just going to go ahead and throw it right over to the team preview screen. So here you can see the teams that we brought to the game. Obviously, his team on the right-hand side, my team on the left-hand side. So as you can see, he brought the Iron Leaves, Great Tusk, Hydreigon, Moltres, King Gambit, and Driftbloom. So there was one kind of surprise on his team this week, or I should say not on his team this week, and that was that he did not bring the Rotom Wash. So I was surprised by that because Rotom Wash is obviously a premier tank. It is very strong, very versatile as well. So I was a little surprised that he did not bring that this week. But everything else that he had, I was kind of expecting. It was pretty much exactly what I was expecting. Other than that, looking at my team, I brought this week. We have the Gastrodon, Hawlucha, Goodra, Pincurchin, Earthworm, and Iron Moth. So this is pretty standard for me. Nothing crazy, no real surprises here. These are my top 6 draft picks. So, yeah, them coming is no surprise. I didn't really have anything crazy up my sleeve here. As I kind of mentioned in the last couple of videos, I found it very hard to prep for this guy's team specifically, just because I thought the roster was very versatile and very well rounded. So I kind of just ended up, after kicking a couple different ideas around in my head, just sticking with what brought me to the dance, which is this core of Pokemon here, more or less, with some little alterations every week, most weeks, I should say, for the most part. So, but yeah, it did end up working out, obviously. So, having said that, we are just going to go ahead and keep moving by throwing it over to our weekly pros and cons. So there you can see on the screen we have 3 pros this week, only 1 con, so we're going to go over those as per the usual. So first up on the pros list, obviously the big pro of the week is going to be that we won the game 3-0. So obviously getting the victory is great. That's what we're aiming for, of course, in addition to having some great matches for you guys. Hopefully producing some entertaining content. So obviously we were very happy to get the win this week. Second pro is this was a very even match through and through, on paper, in practice, hacks wise as well. Everything was incredibly even through and through this game. I don't think either of us really got any hacks, maybe 1 or 2 little ones, nothing crazy. Um, and yeah, it was just even is the word, kind of, I would say, because this was just an incredibly even match. I feel like um, we both played relatively well, although when I get into the con side, I'll explain a little more about that, at least from my perspective. And then, of course, the last pro of the week here is going to be Hawlucha's Rampage. So, if you have watched the battle, you'll all know what I'm talking about here, but we're going to go over it anyway. So, toward the end of the battle, I was actually down 3-4 against my opponent, and so I ended up bringing in Hawlucha on the last turn of the electric terrain that I had set, which of course activated Electric Seed, tripping Hawlucha's Unburden, doubling the speed, doubling the power of acrobatics, all that good stuff. Per the usual. So from this point forward, Hawlucha proceeded to get a kind of a sweep going here at the end of the game, KOing all 4 of my opponent's Pokemon in a row. Those would include a weakened Driftbloom, a full health Iron Leaves, a weakened Great Tusk, and a full health King Gambit. So that was pretty incredible to see Hawlucha go on a tear like that, showing really its true potential and what it can do when set up correctly and used correctly, or correctly enough anyway. um, so that was pretty awesome to see. Um, I'd say the one of the big reasons aside from that this is kind of a cool thing is just due to the fact that so toward the end, or at the end I should say, of that rampage, uh Hawlucha had been chipped from a couple other things. So um at the end of the game, my opponent does bring the King Gambit in. It is at full health, and so he ends up having Supreme Overlord. So with 5 knocked out Pokemon, he gets a huge attack increase. Hawlucha is sitting at I want to say about like 40% health, something like that. And so he goes for the Sucker Punch here, and Hawlucha, being the champ that it is able to hang on in the red with 3 HP, which was incredible, which I believe somebody actually did the damage calc, and it turned out if they did the calculation correctly, which I didn't double check their math, it turned out that that Sucker Punch hit was actually a max roll. So Hawlucha took it like a champ on a max roll, survived it, and finished up the game with a close combat. So that was pretty incredible to see Hawlucha do that, honestly. Obviously, I drafted it for a reason, and I've brought it every week to this point for a reason, because it is just an incredible Pokemon um, when set up correctly, and it's just great to see it doing what it was made to do, essentially. So I was very happy about that, obviously. So that is going to go ahead and feed us to the one con of the week here, and that is going to be, I feel like I made some mild misplays. Let's say it that way. I believe I did make some mild misplays in this game. Obviously, fortunately, they did not cost me the game, but we're going to go over them anyway. So there were two examples in particular in this game that I found were misplays on my side, both at the time and in hindsight, although, definitely at the time, which, we'll go over. So the first one was during the match, toward the middle of the match, I should say, where I had a terastallized fairy earthworm in against my opponent's Great Tusk. So um, I was actually pretty happy that I made that decision, because I was able to get a huge amount of damage on the Great Tusk, dropping it about 45% on an attack there with a Terra Blast Fairy toward the middle of the game, which actually ended up being very pivotal later in the game, having that huge amount of chip on the Great Tusk. But that wasn't really the misplay. The misplay was my opponent has the Great Tusk in, and after I've Terastallized Fairy, I know that there's really nothing that the Great Tusk can do to the Earthworm, so I know the switch is coming. The switch is really obvious this turn, and given what my opponent has left on his team, at this point he has King Gambit, Iron Leaves, and Drifblim left, so obviously he's not going to switch into Iron Leaves, because that thing's not going to appreciate a Terra Blast Fairy. Now, technically he could switch into King Gambit and then try to revenge kill me with a steel move. However, the obvious play in this situation is to switch into the Drifblim, so I full well should have known that he was going to switch into the Drifblim and just gone for an attack to get chip damage on it. However, I decided to go ahead and go for an Iron Defense instead to set up the Earthworm, which obviously was a complete waste of a turn, because he ends up coming in with the Drifblim, and I have no choice but to switch out next turn. So that was a huge waste of a turn, and definitely a misplay on my side. I should have just gone for an attack to try and get more chip damage on whatever he switched in, knowing that the most obvious answer in that situation was the Drifblim. So that's bad on me for doing that. The next example of this that I can find comes just a few short turns after this move. So in this situation, I have an Iron Moth in. It is Quark Drive boosted thanks to the electric terrain being up, and my opponent has the Drifblim in. So in this situation, I decide to just go ahead and go for a Flamethrower, trying to get as much damage as possible on the Drifblim. Whereas after I do that, I take the Drifblim down by about I want to say 70%, so great damage on it. However, unfortunately, my opponent this turn decides to terrestrialize the Driftbloom into a ground type, and in return go for the Terra Blast ground and get rid of my Iron Moth. So this was a misplay at the time for sure on my side, because I should have known at that point in the game, based on the way he was playing the Driftbloom and how he was so willing to bring it in against the Iron Moth, that he had something up his sleeve to deal with the Iron Moth. Additionally, knowing that the Driftbloom was one of his Terra captains, I really should have just pivoted out with the Iron Moth to try and scout for that or whatever potential answer he had. So that was definitely a mistake on my part at the time, and it cost me my Iron Moth. Um, the only reason that I can't be too mad about this at myself is because getting that huge amount of chip damage on the Driftbloom proved to be very valuable later on in the game, for when I came in with Hawlucha and was guaranteed to take that thing out with an attack. So that's really the only silver lining of the situation, is getting that huge amount of damage on the Driftbloom, and then a few turns later being able to come in with Hawlucha and kind of run wild. So, but I still have to call it out because it still was a misplay at the time. I definitely shouldn't have stayed in, because I knew full well an attack, even Quark Drive boosted, was not going to KO the Driftbloom from, I think it was at full health at the time. So, but yeah, other than that, I was really happy with my performance as well as my opponent's performance. One other little thing I want to mention, not that it's in the pros or cons, but just to counter the plays that I made were a little questionable. One other decision that I made that I was actually very happy about, at the time and in hindsight, was the choice not to bring Terrain Extender on my Pink Urchin. So, feeding back to the end of the game where we got that kind of mini sweep with the Hawlucha going. That may not have been possible had I had the terrain extender on the Pink Urchin. So the reason I didn't bring it um, this week is simply due to the fact that, because my opponent had Iron Leaves, I knew for sure he was going to bring the Iron Leaves, and obviously, Iron Leaves has Quirk Drive as well, so he could actually use the terrain against me. So I was really heavily anticipating him bringing a set that would try to use the terrain against me. So I figured, well, I can't exactly not bring Pink Urchin to the game. I have to do something to try and mitigate the electric terrain turns, because obviously the more turns electric terrain is active, the more likely it is to be used against me. So I was pretty proud of that. As well as I mentioned earlier, the Terra Fairy Orthworm, that did actually come through for us as well. So, but yeah, all in all, a really solid game. Very happy to take the win in this one, and another very hard-fought game. And with that, the Philadelphia Pidgeys advance to a 4-1 record this season, as we are a little over halfway through the regular season. Which is going to go ahead and bring us to our next week's opponent, and that is going to be a Praetor 54. So here you can see a snapshot of his team on the screen, and again, just another very stacked roster, as pretty much all of these have been this season. No rest for the weary. And so, yeah, as you can see, he has a lot of premier high point value threats on this team, specifically the Landorus Incarnate, the Urshifu Single Strike, and the Ursaluna are the big ones that are all capable of wreaking havoc on anyone's team at any given time. So that is going to be a lot to try and plan around, obviously. Of course, he also has some other top-level threats like the Azumarill and the Cleaver, and he even has some good value pickups like the Galarian Slowbro, the Poltegeist, the Hisuian Electrode. Even has kind of a little snow core on the team with the Abomasnow and the Satitan. So this is definitely going to be another very difficult week for us, no question about it. And this guy is also known to be a very solid battler as well. So definitely, again, no rest for the weary here. So I'm already beginning to try and figure out what I can do to tackle this team, although obviously not going to reveal any of that at this point, because I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. So, but yeah, looks to definitely be another difficult week for us ahead. So, But yeah, I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. So that's it. Thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.